A near-death experience leads to a vision of Jesus and a subsequent pretty spooky story. All right, so let's jump into this video. This was sent to us by somebody on Instagram, and this is from the Sean Ryan Show. From my understanding, Sean has recently came out as a believer and has been having more of these conversations. So I wanted to react to this.
So then I think I'm familiar with this incident. Could you elaborate on what happened there?
Yeah, her name is Dr. Mary Neal. She's a spine surgeon. She was kayaking with her husband and a group of people in Peru. Goes over a 15, 20 foot drop, which she said is not, it's not horrific for kayakers who know what they're doing. But she ended up at an angle where she plunged in, and the force of it pushed her down, and the nose of her kayak got lodged between two boulders under the waterfall. And so she's pinned to the front of her boat. She can't even release her spray skirt because the pounding of the waterfall. She did everything she could. She's a surgeon, so she's used to panic situations, and she tried to release herself and pretty soon realized she shouldn't be alive still. And it was interesting because she said, right before that, when she realized she can't free herself, she said, I said, God, your will be done, whatever it is. She just had this kind of surrendered posture to God, your will be done. And she said what was interesting is I'd always feared a drowning death, like oxygen starvation. That terrified me. And she said, I never felt that. Instead, as soon as she called out to God, she felt Jesus physically holding her. She wasn't even a very strong believer. She'd gone through medical school and kind of wandered away and kind of become more of an agnostic materialist. And so she was, the first time she told me, she was very hesitant. She's like, who am I that Jesus would care about me or be holding me? Mm-hmm. But she said, but I knew without a doubt. She's very logical and analytical. And she said, I was fascinated because on the one hand, I'm having this conversation with him and she's having like this life review, which is another commonality of a near-death experience. She feels better than she's ever felt. This is more real than anything she's ever felt. But she's also aware that her knees are bending backward and breaking. Ooh. So she realizes wow. She's being like her legs are, and she can somewhat feel it, but there's no pain in it. Then she feels this like kind of like a pop, and boom, she's out of her body, up out of the water, and she's watching her friends panic, swimming around, trying to find her in the waterfall. And then she sees this, what many of them call a welcoming committee of these people. But these people, she said, and by the way, that welcoming committee appears, on the other side, from what I understand, we can appear to each other just like we normally do.
Let's just stop and acknowledge how hard it is that this man wrote a whole book about near-death experiences. That's pretty amazing.
Why?
Because he did the work. People are like, no such thing as miracles. And then you go do the work and show like the documented miracles. There's no such thing as speaking in tongues. And then someone goes and writes a book about all the times throughout church history people have spoken in tongues, and there's been these massive things, right? There's no such thing as near-death experiences. And then someone actually goes and does the hard work and can point to multiple individuals, and then you can go and independently verify their stories if they're still around. Like that's a very good utility, because at the very least, it proves beyond a materialistic world that there is something beyond this physical material world, that there is something in another dimension, supernatural, spiritual realm. There's something out there besides that, right? So it can take people from the study of NDEs, can at the very least take people from atheist to theist.
Yeah.
Which I think serves as a massive utility.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
And the people I saw were in kind of their native garb or whatever they would like. He saw, people from all countries. And, but sometimes they talk about these, they say they're like robes of white, but it's not robes of white. And it's interesting because that's found in Revelation, I think 3 and 5, somewhere like that, which I always thought, I don't want a robe of white, That doesn't sound good. But what I figured out is that they're actually translucent, and there is the light and love and life of God, which fills everything, coming out of them. So that's what Mary said she experienced, these people that she knew, and out of them was bursting this love that was light, welcoming her and greeting her. And she said it was the most joyous occasion. We hugged and we danced, and it was like this big party, this big celebration. And she said, because I knew these people, I had known them for as long as I existed. And then they began going down this path, this beautiful pathway, she said, lined with flowers. She loves flowers. And And at the same time, though, she can see what's going on the riverbank. So she's having kind of almost this dual experience. And she ends up at this place, this large structure, and she can see in, and there are people in there, and it's a city. She says it's a city, like bustling with life. There was life, there was activity. They were all busy doing something. But she said it was almost like there was this momentary, like stopping to acknowledge and just welcoming. She said, it was amazing. Who am I? I'm nobody. And yet I felt so accepted and so just welcomed in. And at another point, she had an encounter with Jesus, and I asked her, so what did he look like? Right? The question. And she said, this isn't going to make sense, but he looked like bottomless kindness and compassion. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, he had physical features, yes, but what just struck me is just bottomless kindness and compassion. Interestingly, a neurosurgeon, a neurologist that I interviewed, said something like that about standing there in the presence of God. That picture the kindest person you've ever pictured or known. You have to multiply it by thousands. And that's what he experienced, combined with the power of standing 5 feet away from a nuclear explosion. I'm trying to put all that.
This is interesting.
You're skeptical?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Your head, you know, that's what blows your box open, right?
Yeah.
So Mary, interestingly, she asked Jesus, she said, man, this is so amazing. Like, why don't you give everybody this experience? Everybody would believe. And I love this because he quotes himself. What he said to Dr. Neal is what he said to Thomas, who's called Doubting Thomas. He's the disciple who, when Jesus was resurrected, wasn't there when Jesus first showed up to his followers. And they were telling Thomas, and he's like, I don't believe it. I'm not going to believe it until I stick my finger in the hole in his side. And Jesus shows up again, and he says, hey, Thomas, touch me. See, I'm not a ghost. I'm physical. He eats fish with them. They touch him. So he says, stick your hand in and see, I'm real. And then Jesus said to Thomas, blessed are you because you have seen, but even more blessed are those who have believed and yet not seen. And that's what he said to Mary. Which is like, I love that. Jesus quoting himself.
Yeah. Wow.
So she comes back and, it completely changed her. She was a materialist doctor,
Is she the one who also was told that her son would die?
Yes. So when she came back, so she didn't want to come back. So this is another commonality of near-death experiencers. What they've told me is when you are in God's presence, you are with your best friend, the greatest dad you could ever imagine, and love that doesn't even compare to the most wonderful spouse or romantic lover, which sounds bizarre, but God's not a male or female. We're created in his image, not him and ours. I use him. The Bible uses him, but it says male and female created in his image. So they don't want to come back. So she didn't want to come back, and she was fighting. This is another thing I love, Sean, is that people in God's presence are themselves. Their same sense of humor, their same, whatever things about them they had. And many times they argue with him, and he gets it. He understands us. And she was very stubborn about it. Like, I am not going back. She had 2 little kids at the time, and she loved her kids, but that's how great it is. And that's common. And so he said to her, look, your son is not going to make it past age 18, or he's going to die at age 18 or something like that. And your family's going to need you to get through that. And then she came back. And at first she tried to disprove her own near-death experience. She's like, that felt so real, but I want it to not be real because of what.
Yeah, because then that would mean that her son's going to die.
Is her son?
She was told was going to happen.
Oh no.
And searching all the records of what happened to her and everything, and then hearing about others too. And she realized, no, it's real. And she didn't talk about it because and she didn't write about it at first because how do you say to your kids, I didn't want to come back for you.
Yeah.
That's what she told me. I couldn't explain that to them. And then she had a time when her son was probably 16 or 17. And there was something they were talking about, when he's married and 30 or 40 and has kids of his own and all that. And he looked at her and he said something like, Mom, I'm not going to live that long. And she was like, it really struck her.
What?
But
can you say that again? Her son said
her
that?
son kind of knew somehow that he wasn't going to live that long. And so then, sure enough, it was right after he was 18, and he was hit by a car and killed.
That's
Dang.
spooky, man.
I don't like this at all. I mean, as in like, I don't like it as in like, that's really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ugh. Ugh.
You want to keep going?
I'm gonna have my 18-year-old. Flynn's gonna be 18 on one of those backpack leashes. You know what I'm saying? Like, sorry, dog.
You're not going nowhere, bud.
Yeah, you're not going nowhere.
need you
Seemed
close.
avoidable, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Oh, man.
Wow, that's weird.
And
Let's play a little bit more.
I'll tell you, an interesting thing, Sean, is Mary. Mary is a friend of mine, and she told me, and my wife Kathy, I know how wonderful it's going to be in the life to come, and I know how good God is, and I saw how His plan works together. It all works together, and it makes sense in the end. But it doesn't take away a mother's grief.
Yeah.
It doesn't take away your grief for your friend you lost.
Yeah.
You still have to go through that, and it was hard for her.
I'll bet it was.
Okay, so my question, here's my big pressing question.
What's your big pressing question?
Don't near-death experiences rely on the idea that like you access heaven upon death?
So, I don't know if it's, I don't know. I don't think so.
Because like there's also the theology that like you just go into sleep and then you wake up and you're like,
Yeah, that's not a very common position. You're
Really?
talking about deep, is it called deep sleep or something like that? No. So in the scriptures it says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord for the believer. So we know that when you're not here, you're with God if you're in Christ.
wow. Okay, so there is some sort of instantaneous heaven
Yes.
experience.
Now what you're describing is when the resurrection of the dead happens.
Yeah.
That's at the end when God resurrects the dead, gives us new glorified physical bodies, and
Okay.
there's a new heaven and a new earth.
Better be new and better be glorified because
Yeah.
I don't want no marshmallows.
Yeah, so you
for
you were
eternity.
kind of alluding to soul sleep, is what you were alluding to. But that's with the resurrection of the dead. That's not a orthodox belief of the end days. Or
Okay,
the
I have
last days.
another skeptic
Okay.
view. I do believe it can be true, and I'll even go as far to say, I think it's real.
Mhm.
I think it's true. However, isn't it possible that in the process of death, you're the chemicals and the craziness in your brain is like firing off and creating some almost very hallucinogenic type dreams that you could be experiencing? And when it goes to like the only thing Jesus said to her was some, like, quoting the exact verse from the Bible, couldn't it be viewed as like just like deep subconscious bringing up things that it's already internalized before and read before and not deviating from those things? You know what I'm saying?
That would be the materialist explanation of that for sure.
Yeah.
Your brain is losing oxygen, losing blood flow, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there is a someone can argue that. I think that the counter argument to that would be, well, how in the world does she get this very specific thing about her son dying?
No, I'm with you.
You know, so I think it could be
Some of you guys are so scared of arguments.
because you also have folks who weren't in Christ and they're just like, I saw a tunnel and it was beautiful and I kept walking down that tunnel. You know, like
That
you
tunnel
also
wasn't
hear-
going to the place you want to go.
Yeah, that's
Just because
not
they're
how
light doesn't mean that's the light you want to be in.
Yeah. So
I'm
I think when you're seeing things echoed in scripture, someone mentioned earlier in the chat that there's this theme of cities is common, and you see cities and you don't see cities. Some people, the people that don't see the city tend to be folks who are not Christian. You know what I mean? They stand outside of the city, and the people who see the city or go into the city are Christian. It's also the idea of like you're outside of time. You know what I'm saying? So like you step outside of time. So it's not quite soul sleep.
Yeah.
But it's more you're outside of time and you're present with the Lord. So I think there's a lot there, but I definitely think that something is happening spiritually.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's just chemicals firing off in your brain because your body's going through something.
I'm with you.
You know?
I think I'm with you. No, I think I try to be skeptical of things that are easy to believe as Christians.
That's fair.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It's like, oh, look at this guy talking on a podcast about some crazy thing that makes us sound awesome. And it's like, yeah, that would be nice to just be in here in the chat, being like, boom, checkmate, atheists. But then it's also like, okay, what's the other side of thing? I'm with you. I think this is awesome. I think this is really cool. It definitely makes me less fearful of death. What's your take of people of like the intuition of the son being like, I'm not gonna live that long.
Well, I mean, we had our buddy Tanner say the same thing.
He did always say the same thing.
All right.
He said growing up, I always thought I was gonna die young, like 25 or something.
And how old was you? You died
25.
25.
Yeah.
I think some people just know. All right, let me know what you think about that in the comments section. And it would be remiss of me to not tell you about our biggest sale of the year, our Father's Day sale happening right now. You can get our brand new Bless God Prayer Journal at the cheapest price it's ever been, as well as some pretty fire priest, provider, protector launch that's perfect for the husband, the father, or the mentor in your life. So go to blessgod.shop and pick up something right now. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.